Well, the autopsy results are in, and it looks like they're going with suicide. There are a few people, on Twitter that I've seen who are not doubting this result. In fact, I would go so far as to say I haven't seen anyone who doesn't doubt it. There have been a few media outlets that have put out stories vaguely condemning conspiracy theories without specifically naming Epstein. But even in those cases that I saw, folks got pretty well ratioed. It seems to be a general consensus among left and right that we don't know the full truth about Epstein's death. There's, of course, a variety of theories as to what could have happened to Epstein, hence the term conspiracy theory. And, of course, people can debate that all day long, just like folks have debated, the JFK assassination for the last, 50, 60 years. But the end conclusion that what we know, what we're being told is incorrect, seems to be pretty widespread. Now, I, of course, am someone who can't really come up with any strong theory as to what could have happened because there are too many possibilities. I really just don't think it would be responsible of me to pick any one scenario and say, okay, this is what happened to Epstein, because we just don't have enough information. However, even though I doubt the official story, I don't even think necessarily that we can rule out the fact that Epstein did in fact commit suicide. In that sense, I think that the autopsy itself may not be completely inaccurate. It could very well be entirely true that the autopsy results showed that Epstein committed suicide, but that is not to say that there was no instance of foul play in this case. Yes, a lot of people are pointing out that the bone that was found broken in Epstein's neck is something that can be broken during a hanging if the hanging is violent enough, and if it's in an older person who has a weaker bone structure like Epstein, but that it is far more common to find this bone be broken in strangulation. So naturally, a lot of people are leaning towards the idea that Epstein was strangled and did not in fact hang himself. However, I think that it is still very possible that Epstein did hang himself, rather than be strangled by some unknown outsider or perhaps someone who works at the prison that just sort of snuck in and did the deed. There is some witness testimony that would seem to confirm, or at least somewhat support, the strangulation theory, since there was at least one report that I saw that a prisoner on that same cell block heard shrieking coming from Epstein's cell. Now, of course, there's also another report that said that a prisoner in that block heard absolutely nothing. So let's just assume for a second that that's true, and that Epstein was in fact not strangled, and that the autopsy report's ruling that Epstein hung himself is in fact accurate. How could that have happened? A lot of people are wondering. Well, the way that would happen, according to the coroner, is that they think that Epstein hung himself from a bunk bed. Well, first of all, a lot of people took issue with that because there was a picture floating around of what Epstein's cell supposedly looked like, and it was, a single bedroom that was essentially a slab of concrete with a mattress on it. So there was no bunk bed for him to hang himself. But if the coroner is saying that there was a bunk bed in the room, well, then that would mean that Epstein was in a two-man cell. Just like he was before he tried to commit suicide the first time. It would seem that the picture circulating was perhaps a picture of the cell that he was in when he was in solitary confinement. And it would make sense for someone on suicide watch to be in a room without any sort of bunk bed or anything for him to hang himself from, and for his bed to not have any rails or anything, and for it to just be a slab of concrete. However, as we know, Epstein was taken off suicide watch under rather suspicious circumstances. We don't exactly know why he was taken off suicide watch yet, especially so soon after his last supposed suicide attempt. And when he was taken off suicide watch, he was put back in a cell with another inmate. And so that would mean that Epstein was, it would seem, at the time of his death, in a two-man cell. Now, another very suspicious fact or not fact, but claim or report that we're getting, was that the other inmate in Epstein's cell was not in the cell at the time, and that he had been removed for some reason. We're not actually sure why, but for some reason Epstein was left alone in a two-man cell. And now, of course, if Epstein was left alone, in the one-man cell, there's no way he can hang himself because there's nothing to hang himself from. However, if he's alone in the two-man cell, he can, as the coroner says, hang himself from the top bunk. And so in order for Epstein to actually be able to commit suicide, there would have to be this perfect storm of events sort of going in that favor. He would have to be, one, taken off suicide watch. He would have to be put in a cell with a bunk bed, and then his cellmate would have to be removed from the cell and Epstein left alone in the two-man cell in order for him to actually hang himself. And it should have been obvious to anyone at the time who was witnessing this that, hey, if we're leaving Epstein alone in a cell that is not sort of suicide-proofed, well, then he can kill himself. They essentially did everything they could to help Epstein kill himself. They gave him the tools that he needed to hang himself. So to me, based on what we're being told, based on even what the official story is, it sounds like Epstein was sort of allowed to commit suicide. And so that's why at this point I can't completely, rule out the official story as, a cover-up, because it still seems plausible to me that if, there were people who wanted Epstein dead, that's one way of getting about it. If the guy's already suicidal, you allow him to commit suicide. But of course, under normal circumstances, if this was done well, if somebody didn't want Epstein dead, he would have not been allowed to commit suicide. There's been a lot of people who've tried to commit suicide in prison, and so prisons generally know the ways that people can do it. There's very few ways you can kill yourself inside of a jail cell, so it's pretty easy for jails and prisons to minimize that risk. And to the contrary, in this case, it would seem like they maximized that risk. They did everything they could within reason to allow Epstein to kill himself. It's like they were prodding him and telling him, go ahead, do it. You're a coward if you don't. Because they gave him every opportunity. I mean, they practically loaded the gun and set it right in his lap. And of course, assisted suicide, you would think, based on, the scenario I've laid out, would be easier to pull off than, say, trying to sneak a guy in there to strangle Epstein and then leave. And it's also harder to make it look like a suicide if the guy is strangled. But, as I said at the beginning, I can't claim to think that any one of these scenarios is, absolutely what happened, because I just don't know at this point. We don't have enough information. But all I'm saying is that it's possible. It's possible that Epstein did kill himself, but not without help. There's absolutely foul play here. There's no reason why the most high-profile criminal in America should be dead under any circumstances, unless somebody on the inside wanted him dead. The reason, of course, being to shut him up so that he didn't incriminate all of his rich and powerful pedophile friends. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.